Today, witches and wizards. Like all 17th century Puritans, all 17th century people, New England's Puritans lived in a world in which the supernatural was close at hand. The modern world of reason and science was just beginning in the 17th century. This is the birth of the modern, but it hadn't taken fully hold yet in the minds of people. People at that time believed they regularly saw and heard wondrous signs of God's activity or Satan's menace. These signs included strange lights in the sky, such as eclipses and comets, prophetic dreams. The Old Testament is full of people having dreams, right? Deformed births of humans and animals was a sign from God or from Satan's. About voices. And then mere coincidences sometimes were taken to be a sign. In the Puritan world, God controlled everything. You're either destined for heaven or destined for hell. God controls everything. That is not the dominant view of most Christians in most times and most places. In the view of most Christians, most times, most places, there's a realm of human activity and human control that allows for freedom of will. Okay, so just because the Puritans believe something, I don't want you to think that that's what all Christians believe. Okay, there may be some of you here that believe that today. That's okay. But that's not what I believe, and that's not what most Christians believe today, okay? That there's a realm of free will. You choose to do this or that, you see. Now, God still has his will, and I do believe there is a Satan who does work in our lives, the devil, Lucifer, right? The evil force. You can't, you can't believe the Bible and not take into account that there is such a force. Jesus Christ himself talked about Satan quite a bit. So to eliminate Satan, you've got to eliminate much of what Christ said. Nevertheless, there are differences as to what Satan does and how he operates and so forth. So getting your theology correct is once again crucial. So in the Puritan world, as I said, God controlled everything. So take, for example, someone who didn't go to church very often and then they died. Then the Puritans would believe that perhaps God had punished that person for not attending church. On the other hand, wealth was considered to be a sign of God's favor. And so if you were doing well and prospering, then God liked you. God loved you and favored you. Puritans believed that God allowed Satan to tempt Christians, and so Satan was very real in the Puritan mind. Moreover, Satan had his methods. People believe that Satan worked in certain ways, working in the human world. So a belief in magic, white magic, black magic, was common, though the use of such magic was considered a sin. Of course, there were people who did use this magic, free will, responding to whatever, whether it was human desire or Satan's will or whatever. And these people were called witches or wizards if they were male. Now I want you to be clear. I want to go back to the two scriptures that we had up there. So the first one is from the Old Testament, and the penalty for being a witch in the Old Testament was harsh. Do not allow a witch to live. In the New Testament, Paul in Galatians is simply warning us that taking part in idolatry, that is putting Satan or anything else before God, and sorcery, which is clearly witchcraft, is a sin. And people who stay in these kinds of activities, who persist in these kinds of activities, shall not inherit the kingdom of God. So let's be clear about this. This is evil. And unfortunately for you, our world is full of this stuff. Okay? It's full of this stuff. You don't have to even try hard at all to find a website of modern witches, right? Come join our club. Sure. So belief in such magic or God made perfect sense to people who felt vulnerable, and this is a key point. People who feel vulnerable in an unpredictable and dangerous world. 17th century life was full of disasters. Fire, floods, storms, crop failures, diseases of livestock, Indian wars, and of course, human disease. Sudden death. Sudden death was common because of all of these different things. There seemed to be no way to control them. And sudden death for children was especially common. Epidemics of flu and measles and the deadly smallpox happened all the time. All of these things called out for an explanation. Why does this happen? Why is this happening to me? Why was my wife, a saintly woman, a Christian woman, taken from me when she was only 25? Happened all the time. It was far more comforting to believe that if one pleased God, one could escape most of these disasters. God would protect you. Far more comforting to believe that than you're just out there a potential random victim of the world. Clearly then, one might seek help from God. God, protect me. Live a saintly life. Or you might seek help from Satan, the being that the Bible calls the God, little g, of this world. Yes. There were 3 levels of witchcraft. There was white magic. The white magic was the use of symbols to gain Satan's favor. It's relatively innocent, except you're appealing to Satan instead of who? God. That's a violation of the first commandment, isn't it? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. For example, in white magic, you might nail a horseshoe upside down on your barn to protect your livestock. And so which of the NFL teams today is Satan's team? Yeah, thank you very much. On their helmets, right? From the beginning is the horseshoe turned upside down. Satan is protecting us. Yeah, absolutely. Now, did the owners of the Colts, when they founded the Colts, decide, oh, let's get Satan's... No, probably not anyway. But it's part of the culture, right? Yeah, there are probably really good Christian people out there with a horseshoe on their barn, right? Don't even really realize what's going on here. But that's where that comes from. Good luck charm, appealing to Satan. Someone who engaged in white magic might also tell fortunes. There are fortune tellers all over the world now. 50 years ago, there weren't. Why? Well, because 50 years ago, the United States was a more Christian people, and now we're not. So one might tell fortunes, but in white magic, there is no intent to harm anybody. I just want a little good luck on my side. That's white magic. Nevertheless, as I already said, it is a violation of the first commandment. Now the second level, black magic. The practitioner of black magic uses spells and potions in an appeal to the prince of darkness. Oh, Satan, come help us. And the spells are like prayers to Satan, and the potions, you make a concoction, you spray it on somebody, or you drink it yourself, or whatever it is. I don't really know because I don't do these things. And now you are actually appealing to Satan to harm somebody you don't like, or to protect you. Okay? The second level. And then, of course, there's the third level. The third level of witchcraft occurred when a person signed Satan's book. I'm one of you, one of your legions, Satan. And you sign it in your own blood. Yeah. The third level of witchcraft. So all 3 levels of witchcraft occurred in Western civilization, not just in the the colonies, but in Western civilization. Wherever Christianity is, you get this stuff, people that are rejecting Christianity at some level, okay? And witch hunts. People in a community or a region grow angry or afraid of what's going on in their community. Maybe it's a flood or whatever. And so they go looking for the witches, witch hunts, to get rid of them. And witch hunts were very common in Europe at this time. Much more so, and this is one of my themes this morning, much more so than in 17th century New England. Europe is much more obsessed with this than the Puritans were. In Europe in the 17th century alone, thousands of witches or accused witches were burned at the stake over the centuries. Thousands and thousands. No full record. In New England, in the years before 1692, so roughly from 1630 when the Puritans landed at the Bay Colony and the colonies began to grow, to 1692, what is that, 62 years later? Math is not a specialty of mine. 2 generations, roughly. Prosecutions for witchcraft were rare. We get this from one of the great historians of this era, a man by the name of Samuel Eliot Morison. You don't have to write his name down. I just want you to know that I am not making this up. So some people in New England engaged in white and black magic. And it seems likely that a few had sold themselves to the devil. Whether or not Satan actually works like this is not the point. The point is, people believed that he did, and they did these things, okay? Belief, fear, and hatred in New England. It is essential to understand that occult beliefs can be self-fulfilling, psychosomatic, for psychology majors. Scientists have found that people who think themselves bewitched may well manifest the behaviors that they are thought to be bewitched with, whether that be illnesses or what have you. This is a fact, well researched, psychosomatic illnesses. In 17th century New England, a reputation for white magic might gain some would-be witch, some respect from neighbors, and even earn a person a few pennies by telling fortunes. Or perhaps somebody has lost something, and so they would go to that strange person out there and ask where that lost thing might be. Okay? Of course, the risk for this kind of behavior is if a witch hunt actually breaks out, who is the first person that's going to be accused of witchcraft? The odd person that's been telling fortunes and so forth. Right? But generally speaking, in New England, people didn't pay much attention to that. They let these people exist and go on about their ways and so forth, generally speaking. And now I want you to keep in mind that in any small village where people have lived together generation after generation, decade after decade, does everybody get along? Oh no. Oh no. There are many hatreds built up over the years. Lawsuits were common. And then there are some people that simply prefer to live just a little bit outside the community, just a little bit farther away. And those people, at least in the Puritan communities, are thought to be a little bit off. Okay? A little strange. Add to that the strangeness or a cantankerous personality. Cantankerous personality is somebody who never seems to be happy, right? Always kind of grumbling, always angry. Won't say hi when you pass them in the street. Somebody who's always a little bit angry. What if you're like that? And so you've got a prerequisite for trouble if a witch hunt breaks out. These are going to be the targets then, aren't they? The logical targets. Those accused as being witches often fit that kind of description then. Somebody who doesn't quite fit in. In short, in the midst of a witch hunt, old community grievances sometimes rose to the top. And you would accuse somebody you hated or who was a little bit odd as being a witch. And that is a serious accusation. That can lead to death. In Salem Village, the Salem witch hunts, Salem Village was one of the most divided communities in New England. We can look back at their village records. We actually have these, and we can see all the lawsuits and all the animosities these people had towards one another. And the division was really evident in the church itself. There was a huge dispute as to who should be admitted as a church member in the small church in Salem. The community was divided over this. Some had a more liberal or relaxed view of who could be a church member, and others were saying, no, the standard is way up here. And so the community is divided over this, in addition to these other things. And there's another huge factor in the paternalistic 17th century. What does paternalistic mean? Yeah, male-dominated. A paternalistic society is a male-dominated society. Paternity, father, right? Okay. Maternalistic, mother, a female-dominated society. So, most of human history is paternalistic, isn't it? Men have dominated. Okay. We're in the midst of trying to sort that out and give women a fair shake. We're not there yet. Perhaps your generation will succeed. Yeah. My wife is a vice president for a significant Pacific Northwest restaurant corporation. She's the highest-ranking woman in that corporation. And could she tell you stories of paternalism? Yeah. But you know what she does? Every once in a while, she'll bring them to task and tell them, that's really not very acceptable or nice. But most of the time, she turns the other cheek and puts up with it. It's the world we live in, right? So it's kind of like it's difficult to know exactly what to do. But you can't just let them walk all over you all the time, can you? But you got to call your shots. Well, paternalistic 17th century. 80% of those accused were what? Women. Here's the ironic part, though. The majority of the accusers were also women. Now, the judges are what? Male, absolutely. It's a paternalistic society. And the ministers who eventually stopped this thing? Yes, it was the ministers who stopped it. They were men. This is complex history here. Fun, though. So for a brief time, then, young women who were generally ignored in this community held tremendous power. It must have been very exciting for them to hold this kind of power, these young women. Okay? It's going to be one of the factors here. Nevertheless, escalation of gossip and grudges into accusation of witchcraft in New England were rare. Doesn't happen that often, not relative to Europe. And again, it's the context that matters. Did everything that I'm going to tell you happen in New England? Yes, it did. But modern historians that don't want to give the Puritans any credit don't tell you about the rest of the world, don't give you that context. They just said, oh, how evil and backward were the Puritans. This is not the case, as we'll see. Generally, rather than rush to judgment in a witchcraft case, the authorities, the civil magistrates, and remember, the church and state in Puritan New England, are they the same or are they separate? What did the Pilgrims establish? What did the Puritans do with church and state? Separate or the same thing? They're separate. So the magistrates are not necessarily ministers. Are they likely Christians? Yes. But they're civil judges, okay? Rather than rush to judgment, the authorities usually carefully followed legal procedures in gathering evidence and hearing the witnesses. And under normal conditions, it was not easy to prove someone a witch in New England, which is why such cases were rare. Before the Salem episode in 1692, there were 93 prosecutions in all of New England, and there are dozens and dozens of communities by this time now. But only 16 of the 93 accused were convicted of being witches. This, compared to Europe, is astronomically small. And then came Salem. So it's a great question. What happened in Salem in 1692? It's a fascinating question. One summer in grad school, I decided I was going to get to the bottom of the Salem witch trials. So I went to the Suzzallo Library at the University of Washington where I was doing my grad work, and I got, I don't know how many books on the Salem witch trials, at least 5 or 6. And I decided I was just going to read every one of them, and I was going to figure this doggone thing out. And I knew a lot when I got done, but you know what? No one has figured this thing out. We have all kinds of theories. We have a real good idea what happened, but we have no idea why. Nobody agrees on why. Okay? The beginning. Abigail Williams was the niece of Minister Samuel Parris. Now, I'm not going to ask you who Abigail Williams was. That's not the point of this lecture. 400 years ago, we don't care. But I'm telling the story, okay? This is all about why and what it means to us, as most of my lectures are. Anyway, Abigail was a niece of the minister Samuel Parris, and she lived in his house along with his wife and their own 9-year-old daughter, Elizabeth Parris. So the 2 little girls. In January 1692, the 2 girls became ill. That's what it looked like. They're sick. They had fits and seemed to be bitten and pinched by invisible agents, which also threw them into the most contorted positions. The kind of contorted positions you wouldn't think that a little girl could do to herself. Observers were quite convinced the girls could not have done these things. So rational, level-headed adults looked at this behavior and said, my goodness, this is not normal. Okay? John Hale wrote, and again, I'm not going to ask you who John Hale was. Sometimes they were taken dumb. They couldn't talk. Their mouths stopped, their throats choked, their limbs racked and tormented so as might move a heart of stone to sympathize with them. Doctors had no solution. The occult, of course, now, witchcraft, suspected. Parris and others, what do Puritans, what do Christians do in a time of trial? They fast, they pray. That's what they did for days and days. And then a neighbor, out of compassion, resorted to some white magic. Decided to try to see if she could figure out what's going on. And so she told Tituba. So here's Tituba. She is a slave. Yes, there is slavery in New England by this time, okay? And Tituba was from the Caribbean. And one of the belief systems in the Caribbean then, and even to this day, is voodoo, right? Black magic. And so now Tituba is told by this woman to see if she can figure out what's going on with these kids. And here's what she's told to do. Make a witch cake. Take the urine of the children. This is how you make a witch cake. Bake with rye flour. Feed it to the family dog. Your witch cake, you feed it to the dog. Yes. This mysteriously somehow, according to white magic, would allow the children to identify the witch that was tormenting them. Okay, again, the point is not that this works or not, okay? I'm pretty sure this doesn't work. But that's what they did. It's what you believe. Amazingly, it worked. Guess who the girls said was the witch who tormented them? Tituba. And I suspect that Tituba had been regaling them with stories of witchcraft and things like that all along. Okay? Probably that is true. Still, the girls, being as young as they were, no one at this time was willing to make a witchcraft case out of this thing. Not how reluctant the authorities are here. Then it spreads. Ann Putnam, age 12. Elizabeth Hubbard, 17. became afflicted. Afflicted means to demonstrate these symptoms, okay? Became afflicted with whatever was seizing these young girls. So it's moving outside the Paris house. Now, Putnam's parents were close friends of the Parises, so they would have known what was going on inside the Paris house, is the point. And Hubbard lived in the house of the doctor who was trying to treat them. So both these young ladies would have heard what was going on in the minister's house. And so they might have become frightened. Both these girls also accused Tituba of being a witch. But now they added Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as accused witches. So Tituba and now two Sarahs. Again, I'm not going to ask you for the list of the witches here. It's not the point. Both Good and Osborne fit the description of women likely to be accused, the kind of women that I described earlier, who were on the outskirts of the community, both in terms of how they related to the community, but probably also where they lived. And Osborne herself was involved in a land dispute with the Putnams. So there's bad blood there. Now a court of inquiry is convened because now we got 4 girls who were afflicted. And the fear is that it's going to what? Spread. So we got to stop this, even though it's been going on for weeks now. The girls appeared as witnesses, and the accused were brought in one at a time. Tituba confessed to being a witch. She has no problem with that. She was. Okay? And implicated others in the community, including Osborne and Good. So Tituba is saying, yeah, they're witches as well. Over the next few months now, other members of the community began having fits and accusing other members of the community as being witches. It's like a virus. A mere accusation like this now was enough to cause a person to be arrested. So the civil authorities then, if there's an accusation made, will send the sheriff out and that person will be arrested. Fear is now taking hold in Salem and the surrounding countryside. Perhaps people begin to think, perhaps it's better to do what than wait for what? Perhaps it's better to accuse than to wait to be accused. Protect yourself. Unless you've been really, really frightened, you probably can't relate to that. Puritans now believe the community was under Satan's direct attack. Hysteria was rampant and took hold of the most susceptible, especially young women. But who to accuse? In the beginning, it was the people talked about in the community as strange, as enemies, the oddballs. But it's not going to stop there. Rebecca Nurse. Now, I would like you to remember who Rebecca Nurse is. Because I feel sorry for Rebecca Nurse. She's the kind of person I do aspire to be. Okay. A faithful Christian servant. And this is what happens to her. Does your theology account for this? If it doesn't, you need to adjust your theology. Well, it was one thing to accuse people like Sarah Good, who even her husband said, yeah, I think she's probably a witch. I love that. But it was another entirely. Apparently some of you don't have my sense of humor. It was another thing entirely to accuse Rebecca Nurse. She's 70 years old. She's a pillar of the church. If you attend church, you know somebody like this. Elderly women who are just always there, always praying, as kind as the day is long. When told she had been accused by several of the afflicted girls, she said to the people who came to arrest her in her home, "Well, as to this thing, I am as innocent as the child unborn." But now here's her theology. But she wondered, and I quote now, somebody wrote this down for us. She wondered, "What sin has God found out in me, unrepented of, that he should lay such an affliction on me in my old age?" The only way she could understand this was that she was in some way guilty of a sin that she was really not aware of and unrepented of, and that's why she was being accused. Now, in my theology, there's all kinds of free will for people to do evil things that have nothing to do with me. Okay? And I have to deal with the consequences in faith and grace. You see? So there's a difference in our theology there. The judges, of course, were at first sympathetic to Rebecca Nurse. They couldn't believe that she'd been accused. When she appeared in court now, the girls writhed in pain. Pay attention now. And they claimed that her specter or spirit did torment them. So the accusers, the girls who are sick, afflicted, are in court. They're witnesses. And they are now writhing in pain left and right and up and down, screaming and yelling. And they're saying that the specter, the spirit, that they could see the spirit of Rebecca Nurse leave her body and come inflict on these girls, the accusers, pain and torture. So again, spirit, specter, okay, is coming out of Rebecca Nurse. These girls say they see it, and it's afflicting them. And so when Rebecca Nurse moved to the right, the girls flailed themselves to the right. And when she moved to the left, they flailed themselves to the left. And if she raised her hands or nodded her head, they would do these things only in exaggerated manner. The fits of the girls were so impressive to everyone there that even those who were accused thought there was some kind of possession going on here. This was not natural. The question was then, who tormented them? Again, the afflicted girls testified that they saw the specter or spirit of the accused leave their body and afflict them. This occurred right in the courtroom. And so most of those who were convicted of being witches were convicted not by testimony from something that had happened outside the courtroom, but by something that happened in the courtroom, in front of the judges. And now the judges made a fatal error. And again, they're not the ministers, okay? They're the civil judges. The judges decided to accept the testimony of the afflicted girls, the sick girls, that the specters, the spirits of the accused, tormented them. You accept that testimony? Because nobody else can see this. The judges don't see the specters. It's only the afflicted girls who see it. You accept that testimony, and the accused has no defense. That is spectral evidence. And that is what's going to send these people to the gallows. Does everybody understand this? You understand what who the afflicted are. You understand who the accused and the accusers are in terms of just their categories. You understand spectral evidence. Okay? Yes?
Sorry, I guess I might be missing. How does spectral evidence qualify itself just for freaking out?
Because the girls who are sick, who are afflicted, say that they can see the specters, and that's what's happening. And you're right, it is not logical. And that's why there's no defense for it, because nobody else sees this. You're just trusting the sick girls, the afflicted girls. And to help us understand, what are the judges to think? What other explanation is there for this, you see? Given your thought process and your worldview at this time, what other explanation is there? And now the most ironic fact. If one confesses to being a witch, what happens? You confess to being a witch, what happens to you now? No. No. If you confess to being a witch, you are held in jail for a while, but eventually you'll be let free once the hysteria passes. Tituba confessed to being a witch, didn't she? Tituba lives. Tituba is set free and she goes her own way. Okay? Well, who did they hang then? Rebecca Nurse was convicted of being a witch and condemned to hang. Why? Because she refused to say that she was a witch. She refused to confess her faith in Satan, because to do so is what, Christians? It's a sin. It's blasphemy. To deny Jesus Christ as your Savior is a sin. It is blasphemy. And Christians throughout 2 millennia have gone to the burning stake. They have gone to the hangman's noose. They have gone to the hatchet because they would not confess Satan. They would not deny Christ. God grant me that faith, should the day come. Rebecca Nurse will not deny Christ to save her life. So who would be most likely to refuse to confess Satan? Christians. Who's going to be hanged then? Christians. And those who are truly believers in Satan will say, oh yeah, no problem, I'm a Satan worshiper, and they go free. Rebecca Nurse was hanged on July 19th. And she went to the gallows with great Christian calm, faith. The hysteria spreads. In the end, by fall of 1692, over 130 people have been accused. There are so many accused that the authorities are placing them in barns and houses across the community because there's no jail space for these people. And they're paying the owners of the barns and the houses to keep these people, in a room under lock and key. And throughout the region, several dozen people have been afflicted. Now the afflicted girls and women accuse the governor's wife of witchcraft. The governor's wife. Now supported by the more responsible ministers led by the most famous minister of this time, a man by the name of Increase Mather. His first name is Increase, not to be confused. Increase Mather. And Increase Mather and these other ministers had all along warned the civil magistrates against the use of spectral evidence. They had said this was wrong and that the judges would not listen. They're terrified, you see. But the ministers are telling them, don't do this. You read most histories of this moment, of this time, and it's the wacko Christians who are putting these people to death. That is not the case, folks. Yeah, the whole community is Christian, I get that, okay? But the ministers are trying to stop it. Led by Increase Mather. And so now the governor loves his wife. I can imagine what would have happened if he hadn't. And he says, all right, that's it. Governor's order, no more prosecutions for witchcraft, no more hangings. Let's all get calm again. Take a deep breath. The governor ordered the trial stopped, as I said, and he pardoned everybody who'd been accused. Praise the Lord for this governor. Common sense. It was not long before the authorities involved, the judges involved in this, regretted what had happened. One of them later on stood up in church and confessed his sin. God forgive me. And I think it was the same man who spent the next 20 years trying to make restitution to the families of those who had died. Of his own free will. Summary. Before I get to the summary, though, I want to say that what happened in Salem was the last time in the colonies in the United States that there would be witch trials. The last time. So you get this little burst of activity, and then it's flamed out. It goes away entirely. That's not the case in Europe. So witch hunting now passes into the American vocabulary as a metaphor for the dangerous urge to find scapegoats for tragedies. If one engages in a witch hunt today, and this language is used all the time today, especially in politics, my opponent is on a witch hunt. If you hear that, that means that the person saying that is accusing his or her opponent of a witch hunt, meaning the use of flimsy or non-existent evidence to besmirch his character. You see that? They're on a witch hunt. They have no evidence. Okay? Most recently, President Trump accused the Democrats in the Mueller investigation of being a witch hunt. That language is, and if you don't know what a witch hunt is, then it doesn't resonate with you. You don't get it. Trump was saying they don't have any evidence. Okay? When he said it's a witch hunt. The second thing we learned from the Salem episode is that history itself can be a witch hunt. Yes. The very historians who criticize the Puritans for their witch hunt have engaged in their own form of a witch hunt when they distorted the facts of what happened in Salem. Distort the facts by emphasizing this and not telling us the whole story? By exaggerating flimsy evidence? Not telling you the whole truth? Happens all the time. Happens all the time in history, happens all the time in politics. Happens all the time in sports. Just so some of you understand this. So you're listening to sports radio or you're watching, Sports Center, and they bring on three guys, and of course they want an argument, right? That's why we tune in. You can see these guys yell at each other. And they all yell at each other over who's the greatest quarterback of all time. These are my three facts, right? Everybody's got a different three facts, don't they? That's why you tune in. In politics, we should do this, we should do that. Here's my three facts, why you're right, or why I'm right and you're wrong. The facts aren't the same. Facts may not even be true. They might be spectral evidence, okay? Our whole society is made up of this. To the point that you don't know what's true. So everything you read, everything you hear, you've got to take, with the old-fashioned expression, a grain of salt. You've got to think it through on your own, and you've got to be reading and listening to more than one source. And certainly not one source that's always on the other side, or on this side, or that side. It doesn't matter. Whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, if you're only listening to the one side, you're only getting one interpretation of the facts. And if you believe Tom Brady was the greatest quarterback of all time, well, you're just so sadly mistaken. Okay? You find your facts, I'll find mine. So sadly, even history can be used as a witch hunt. And it is. So we have to have an idea why the event occurred. And what really happened is important for the educated person. For you're not going to get the whole truth in just one source. The media is biased. More biased today than it has been in our lifetimes, my lifetime. Okay? It's as biased now as it was back in the decade before the Civil War. Guess what happened? Civil War. Okay? Yeah. So that's the world we live in. Context of this time is what I've been emphasizing in this lecture. It's been the theme of the lecture. What's going on in the world at this time? How do the Puritans stack up to the rest of the world at this time? In Europe, thousands of people were burned as witches in the 17th century alone. Thousands. In Salem, 20 died. 20 people died. 19 were hanged, and one man who refused to confess either way, whether he was a witch or not. They put rocks on top of his chest because he would not, make a plea. And they just kept piling rocks on top of his chest until he was crushed to death. So 20. Okay. The Puritans were not less rational or level-headed than the people of their time. They were not. They were more rational, more level-headed than the vast majority of the people of their time in Europe. Salem was an aberration, not the norm. Historians, if you read poor history, aren't we so thankful we're not like them? Do you know what the Puritans said when the whole thing was over? We are so thankful we're not like that anymore. Will you put that behind us? See. And what really happened at Salem? Surely we know. Surely we know the truth, right? To this day, historians cannot explain the behavior of the afflicted girls. They do not agree. They all have their own theories. Some have argued the afflicted suffered from a form of mass hysteria. I'll bet some did. Some that they were simply faking. I bet some were. And of course, some of those who were accused as being witches said to the court, the person possessed is not me. The devil worshiper are my accusers over there. The girls on the road. It's late 1692. The witchcraft episode is over. Several of the afflicted girls were traveling in a small group through nearby Ipswich, a neighboring village, when they encountered an old woman on a bridge. A witch, they called out. Apparently they hadn't learned their lesson yet. And they began writhing in pain and throwing themselves in the dust. And they claimed that the old woman's specter tormented them. But the people of Ipswich were unimpressed. They did nothing. They showed no interest in the drama queens. Unable to generate any interest, the girls eventually picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and walked on. Questions? No, Bradford's long dead. Yeah, he's long dead, yeah. Yes.
So what was exactly that
Increase led other ministers, they went to the governor and they said, hey, you've got to put a stop to this. This is unchristian, it's unscriptural, we're accepting evidence that's not evidence, the spectral evidence. It was Increase Mather who stopped this, okay? Because he was the most respected clergyman in the entire region, okay? And his son, Cotton Mather, will become even more so. Anybody else? Good question, thank you. Yes? I can't quite hear you. Well, it would be the same thing in their minds. Demon possession, witchcraft, Satan, same thing. Whether it's Satan or one of his dark angels. Yeah, good question, thank you. Any other question? Yes?
What do you think actually happened?
So my best guess, I think it starts with the girls faking, some of them along the way. I don't know about the first two girls, what's going on there. That's really tough. Perhaps because Tituba is in the house, they are actually scared to death of witchcraft, okay? And it's psychosomatic, perhaps, all right? But I believe somewhere along the way you've got to have some faking, okay? All right. Anybody else? Hang on a second now. So what are the good questions that we might ask about this lecture, questions that might be on the exam? Yes?
Rebecca Nurse and her trial.
Yeah, I think it's important to know who Rebecca Nurse was for your own theology and understand that here's a Christian woman that was hanged for witchcraft. You got to account for that somehow. Don't you? I think so. Okay, what else? Yes? Why do we still study this? Why is it still important? What does it tell us about what, right? What does it tell us about history? What about our humanity? What does it tell us about the Christian faith? These are all good questions. Okay? About the legal system, right? It can go astray. And not just because of witchcraft issues. Okay? Good. What does it tell us about the legal system? Yes?
I was just going to ask, do you want us to know the 3 levels of witchcraft?
Do I want you to know the 3 levels of witchcraft?
No.
How many think yes? How many think no? Raise those hands high. Yeah. I don't think I have a question about the 3 levels of witchcraft, but now you know what? I'm going to make sure I don't. Right. Yes.
Maybe like we have the same problems in our court system today.
Yeah. Do we have the same problems in our court systems today? Good question. Do we have the same problems in our culture today? We absolutely do, and I think that's the most important thing to recognize. People are less concerned about evidence for their arguments, and they're more concerned about what? What? Hype. They're more concerned about getting their point of view across and being accepted regardless of the evidence. Okay? That's the danger today. Okay? And that is the real reason for studying history right there, that we are armed against lies today. That we are armed against lies. Are you perfectly armed? No. You can't be because we don't live in a perfect world. But you can be better armed. See? All right, God bless you all.